How would you go about adjudicating, if you were a student coming to these theories for the first time, how would you go about adjudicating between them, deciding for yourself which was the best approach? Is there some test case that you can evaluate these different theories relative to, or test cases if you're comparing different approaches within the same category, for example, those that accept the legitimacy of the state and those that don't?
Well, there are cases that will do some of this work, but I can't think of one that will do all of it. So one of the fundamental issues is whether there are rights, right? And now there's a little thought experiment, if you like, known as Sen's paradox, which tries to show that individual rights, that is, individual control over certain decision making, where nobody else can actually affect that decision. And Pareto optimality, as the economists talk about it, that is a situation which is agreed to be the best by whatever standard you're using, that these inevitably come into conflict, or at least, that they can inevitably come into conflict, depending, I guess they wouldn't have to if people never sought to exercise their rights, for example. So once you've got that idea on the table, that the best overall way that a society might be organized in terms of, say, consumer goods or social goods of one kind or another, and individual rights cannot be guaranteed to be consonant, then you've got a choice to make, right? And one choice is you can emphasize the individual rights, or you can emphasize the overall social values and goods. And people will go different ways on that. And then if you go on the right side, you've got to choose between thinking that rights are always negative, that any right you have is a right to not be interfered with in some way or other, versus that there are positive rights to be helped by others, for example. And that's going to be fundamental. Now, one kind of case that Nozick considers, for example, that will test some of these intuitions is the following. He imagines this extremely talented basketball player. Remember, he wrote this book in the early 1970s.
That's Anarchy, State and Utopia.
Anarchy, State and Utopia. And the greatest basketball player of that generation probably was Wilt Chamberlain. So he imagines Wilt Chamberlain, who making the following deal. He says, look, I will play under basketball with my team in the league under the following conditions. For every person who comes to see my game, you will reward me in some way, say an extra 25 cents on the price of the ticket or whatever. Otherwise, I get no salary. So what I get is completely determined by what people are prepared to give to watch me play. Okay? Now, what Nozick wants to point out is that if you allow that, there's no way to guarantee that Chamberlain won't be either much richer than everybody else or much poorer than everybody else, depending on how it goes. So there's no way to guarantee any particular social pattern once you allow people to do that kind of thing. Notice, to prevent people doing that kind of thing, you're going to have to either bring it about that that's not a kind of deal they can make, or bring it about that people simply can't give Wilt the extra 25 cents or whatever. So you're going to have to claim that interference with one side or the other of that is completely justified in terms of some larger social good. So that's the kind of case that's going to sort of test people's intuitions here. Rawls would say, yes, you're perfectly justified in interfering because that will take away from equality and may not work to the benefit of everyone. Nozick will say you may not be justified in interfering because you have a fundamental right not to be interfered with, and there's no justification here for doing it. Say an anarcho-communist might say, look, what do you mean give 25 cents to Wilt Chamberlain? Where did this money come from, and what's it got to do? Who owns money in the first place? And a pure Marxist, market capitalist might say, well, of course, that's the kind of thing you can never interfere with, because no contract between people can ever, that's freely entered into, can be ever justifiably interfered with.